Hello, and welcome to another episode of Reason at Large. I'm Craig Biddle. Today, I'd like to discuss a question that I've received in many forms over the years, and that is, why do I and other objectivists use the term sacrifice to mean giving up a greater value for the sake of a lesser value, when the widespread accepted usage of that term means just the opposite, giving up a lesser value for the sake of a greater value? This is an excellent question and one that really deserves some attention. So I want to talk about the usage of the term historically. I want to talk about the dictionary definitions that give rise to what I regard as the confusion here. And I want to talk about the proper standard of a definition, and then we'll concretize this all with some examples. The first thing I want to sort of mention to get out of the way is the long-standing use of sacrifice to denote instances throughout history when various cultures and mostly tribes and the like would slaughter either animals or people, sometimes even children, to curry favor with their gods, or to stop the gods from wreaking havoc on their crops, or slaughtering them with floods and the like. And these are typically referred to as sacrifices. So for instance, when the Aztecs and the Mayas and the Incas and the like would take people, sometimes children, and cut their hearts out and hold it up to the gods, this was regarded as giving up a value of a value of sorts, the child, for an alleged higher value, the favor of the gods. We see this same kind of thing in the Bible when Abram was asked by God to murder his son to please God, and Abram was going to do it, and of course God at the last minute said, "Oh, no, I was just kidding. Just wanted to make sure you were obedient." And in this case, again, Abram was going to kill his son, whom he loved, for an alleged higher value, God. And this kind of thing falls into the category of a sacrifice being giving up a value for a greater value. And I think this is part of the confusion, that people have accepted the idea in part based on that kind of historic usage. The first thing I want to point out is that there's something wrong with even that usage at this level we can see. And that is, what was really happening here, regardless of what the intentions of these mystics what was really happening? They were giving up a value, a child or a goat or whatever they were slaughtering. They were giving up a value for the sake of what they thought was, right, a higher value. So that's the intention. But what in fact they were doing is giving up a value for the sake of nothing at all. There is no God. There are no gods. There never were or have been any. So what you have is the giving up of a value for the sake of, in fact, nothing. Now, their mysticism and irrationality in this regard doesn't mitigate the loss. It's the cause of the loss. So although their intention was to gain favor from a higher value, the favor of God or the gods, the fact is that what was being done in reality is a giving up of a value for the sake of nothing. And that's notable. I brought this animal slaughter and human slaughter issue up first because I want to get that out of the way to some extent before we move on to some of the richer content. But I think that will play into the rest of the discussion here as we go. So I wanted to get that out on the table first. The next thing I want to do is I want to turn to some actual dictionary definitions, which I think help to perpetuate this confusion here. And the first one I want to read is from the Oxford English Dictionary, and this is from my old dusty version of it, so this is a fairly established dictionary definition. The OED defines a sacrifice as, quote, the surrender of something valued or desired for the sake of something having or regarded as having a higher or a more pressing claim. Now that ties right into the idea that you sacrifice your child for the favor of God. The child is a value, but the God has a more pressing claim. A newer version of the Oxford Dictionary defines sacrifice as, quote, an act of giving up something valued for the sake of something else regarded as more important or worthy. And again, this definition ties into the idea that you're giving up something valued for this greater thing, so a lesser value for a greater value. But observe a problem on either of these definitions if we try to apply it. Suppose you have a good job that you love, or take that back. Suppose you have a good job that you like, and you quit that job to take a better job that you'll love, so you've moved up. On these definitions from the Oxford Dictionary, we would say that that's a sacrifice. You've committed a sacrifice there. And that just doesn't sound right, does it? There's something wrong with using the term sacrifice in that context to mean, to denote that kind of a trade there. You're trading, you're exchanging a job that's, good, you like it, for another one that you love, say your dream job. And to call that a sacrifice just sounds wrong. And there's a reason for that. We'll get to that as we proceed. But I want to read another dictionary definition because it actually gets worse in a sense. The Webster's Dictionary defines sacrifice as the surrender of something for the sake of something else. So on this definition, any exchange of anything for anything else at all is a sacrifice. So if you have a crappy job that you can't stand, let's say you've got a job, shoveling elephant manure for a circus, and you hate this job, and then you quit that job to take your dream job, say training elephants, being an elephant trainer, then you've exchanged one thing for another. So we have to call this a sacrifice, right? That's just ridiculous. If you went the other way, if you had your dream job and then you quit that in order to take a job shoveling manure, that would make sense to call that a sacrifice, right? And just on sort of a visceral level, we can say that would make sense, but the other would not. But even if we step away from jobs, look how silly this definition is. Suppose you own a Maserati, brand spanking new, beautiful, perfect condition Maserati. And you exchange that Maserati, you trade that Maserati for $1. Some stranger comes up and says, here's $1, I want your Maserati. And you say, okay. You give him the Maserati, he gives you the $1. Well, on this definition, it's an exchange, so we call it a sacrifice. But it doesn't rub us wrong, because you gave up a Maserati for $1. It sounds like, well, that is a sacrifice. But observe that on this definition, the opposite is true too. If you've got $1 and you exchange your $1 for the brand spanking new Maserati, you've committed a sacrifice on this definition. So what is wrong with these definitions? There's obviously something wrong with them, and what is it? The problem with these definitions is they don't serve the purpose of a definition. First of all, let me point out that the standard of proper definitions is not popular usage, and it's not dictionaries. Dictionaries are written by people, and they sometimes have conflicting definitions. So what is the standard for a proper definition? The standard is the requirements of human cognition. We need our definitions to do certain things so that we know what we're thinking about and what we're talking about when we use words. The purpose of a definition is to distinguish all of the things that we want to include in a given concept from all of the things we're trying to exclude or segregate from that, so that we know specifically what we're talking about when we use a concept. The goal is to draw a bright line between these two things, what's to be included and what's to be excluded. When it comes to actions that are intended to either achieve a net gain or achieve a net loss, or incur a net loss, I should say, we need two different concepts, and therefore two different definitions for the words that represent those concepts. Because they're different things. They're essentially different things. Now, before we move on, I need to point out that the myth of psychological egoism, the idea that all human actions are motivated by self-interest, is a myth. It's false. That's not true. And if we don't understand that that's not true, it's going to seem like any exchange can be called either a sacrifice or a gain or anything else you want to call it, because they're all motivated by self-interest anyway. But that's not the case. Human beings are motivated fundamentally by the ideas that we accept as true, especially, and particularly in regard to this subject, especially the moral ideas that we accept as true. We're not necessarily going to act self-interestedly all the time. We're not automatically self-interested. We can act against our interests. And if you accept a moral code that says you should act against your interests, then you're going to do that on occasion, unless you're willing to consistently act against what you think is the moral way to act, which very few people are willing to do. So if someone accepts a moral code that says you should act in a way that renders you a net loss, then they're going to do that. Now, there are examples of this throughout history. Consider the saints, the medieval saints. They would use a rock for a pillow and drink laundry water and, flog themselves if they had sexual desires and the like. And why would they do this? Because they were trying to avoid the sin of selfish pleasure. They thought that to have pleasure is wrong. So they would take actions to undo or stop themselves from having any pleasure, and they would act explicitly selflessly. And if you were to go up to them and say, well, I think you're just doing that because you're self-interested, they would have looked at you like you were crazy, because that's not what they were up to. They were acting on their moral ideas against their interests because they thought that that is how they should act. And it's not limited only to saints. People do this, unfortunately. I mean, it's perverse but true that people do this. Some people today, college kids or young Americans, go off to join the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps. Why? Many times, if not the vast majority of times, they do it because, not because they think, well, this is something that's just going to be great, this is what I really want to do with my life. Rather, they go off to build mud huts for strangers in a third world country. Why? Because they think that it is the moral thing to do something that's not going to add value to your life, that's not good for you, but that is in fact giving up the things that are good for you. If they went off to Wall Street, or if they started a restaurant, or if they became an architect, or did something that they really, really loved to do, that would be self-interested. That would be adding value to your life, and therefore wrong according to the prevailing moral code of altruism. So they don't do that. They go off and join the Peace Corps or the like. Now, that's not to say that everybody who joins the Peace Corps does it on that motive, but some do. My point is simply that some people do sometimes act intentionally against their interests. And we need a concept to denote that kind of action, just as we need a concept to denote actions that are intended to add value to your life. These are cognitive needs. If we want to understand the world, we have to use concepts a certain way. So concepts that denote gain are, investment, trade, profit, or simply gain. And concepts that denote actions intended to incur a loss are, forfeit, sacrifice, loss, and the like. And we need different definitions and different words to denote these different things in reality. So that's the reason that we need different definitions. The standard is the requirements of human cognition, the definitions and words that enable us to segregate things, in this case actions intended to gain value for you and actions intended to give up value for you. So that's the purpose. Now, I want to also point out that it's not the case that all sacrificial action, all action that gives up a greater value for the sake of a lesser value, is motivated by a moral code that calls for that. I mean, you can, and some people do, sacrifice by means of just sheer laziness or short-sightedness or stupidity. I mean, some people refuse to think past the day. Some people don't realize or make themselves explicitly aware of the fact that life is an ongoing process spanning years and decades, and that we need to take all sorts of actions in order to ensure that we gain not only the material values but also the spiritual values, such as self-esteem and love and friendship and the like, that's necessary to live and prosper. And if somebody is either too lazy or too short-sighted or too stupid to think in that way, or just refuses to do so, that's a sacrifice of sorts too. And in either case, whether it's motivated by bad morality, or whether it's motivated by short-sightedness or laziness, or caused by those, we still need a concept to denote the nature of the action. And that's what the concept of sacrifice properly does by the standard of human, the requirements of human cognition. Now, to drive this point home, I want to close with a story about two very different kinds of kidney donors. And I think that this really makes the point super clear. So I want to read to you two different stories. The first one comes from the New York Times about a kidney donor, and then I'll read another one about another kidney donor. And this will, I think, really help to clarify the issue. So, from the New York Times. Having already given one kidney to a total stranger, Zell Kravinsky was sipping an orange mango Snapple and, unprompted, making the case for giving away his other one. "What if someone needed it who could produce more good than me?" Mr. Kravinsky said in an interview. "What if I was a perfect match for a dying scientist who was the intellectual driving force behind a breakthrough cure for cancer or AIDS, or on the brink of unlocking the secrets of cell regeneration?" His wife, Emily, a psychiatrist, has threatened to divorce him. She's worried that his altruism is coming at the expense of their 4 children. The Kravinskys have given away $15 million, with Mr. Kravinsky promising to give away virtually everything the family has. Mr. Kravinsky says he is only applying the altruistic principle of maximum human utility, explaining, "My life is not worth more than anyone else's." He said the only argument against altruistic kidney donation, those given to strangers, that has any validity for him is the one pressed by his wife and parents, who asked what he would do if one of his children needed a kidney and he had none to give. But, he said, he considered the probability of that happening. "I thought about all that and decided that the probabilities simply didn't outweigh the life of my recipient. I love my children, I really do, but I just can't say their lives are more valuable than any other life." The article ends with this quote from Kravinsky, "No one should have a vacation home until everyone has a place to live. No one should have a second car until everyone has one. No one should have 2 kidneys until everyone has one." So that's the story of kidney donor number 1. Now, should we say that when Zell Kravinsky gives up his kidney to a perfect stranger, someone he doesn't know at all or have any reason to care anything about this person, that he is committing a sacrifice? Yeah, it makes sense to say that. Should we say that if he gives up his second kidney for a perfect stranger, not only that he would die, but that his children and his wife would now not be able to have that kidney, if he needed to, if they needed it at some point in the future? Would we call that a sacrifice? Well, I mean, I think it really clearly makes sense that that's what the term denotes. This is the kind of thing that the word sacrifice captures. And we need a concept to capture this kind of thing. I mean, what if we didn't have the concept of sacrifice to capture this kind of thing? It would be a problem. So here is kidney donor number 2. Now this is a little more inspiring than Mr. Kravinsky there. This is a story about a woman named Melissa DeGeso-Jones, and this comes by way of MSN. 3 days before Valentine's Day, Melissa DeGeso-Jones donated a kidney to her husband, James Jones, who was suffering from renal failure. "I'm giving as much love as I have," DeGeso-Jones said before the surgery. "James had said things to me about it being a huge sacrifice, and I said, it's not. It's an investment. This is our life. It's not just your life that I'm giving to. There can't be an us without it. So that's what it's about." Now, I submit that Miss DeGeso-Jones is using the concept of sacrifice precisely correctly. She is recognizing that she's giving up something that is a value. Sure, it's a kidney, it's a value to her, but it's something she can live and prosper without, and she's giving it up for something that she can't live and prosper without, her husband, whom she loves, and their relationship, and all that that means. So this is giving up a value for a higher value, for a greater value. And this is not a sacrifice. This is an investment, which is the word that she used, and I think she's admirably exact in that usage. So the bottom line is we need two different kinds of concepts. We need two different concepts, and we need different, you can have multiple words identifying this, profit and gain and things like that on one side, and forfeit and loss and sacrifice on the other. But we need different words to denote the different concepts that subsume the different kinds of actions that people take in reality. And that's why we need to use the concept of sacrifice to mean giving up a greater value for the sake of a lesser value or a non-value. Now, of course, people are free to use concepts however they want, and writers of dictionary definitions are free to put in their dictionaries whatever definitions they want. But if we want our concepts to serve the purpose of concepts, and if we want our definitions to serve the purpose of definitions, which is to group things according to essential similarities and differentiate them from things that don't have those same essential characteristics, then we need to use concepts correctly. And that's what understanding proper definitions, and in this case using the concept of sacrifice correctly, entails. That's it for this episode of Reason at Large. If you have a question you'd like me to address in a future episode, please email it to me at cbiddle@theobjectivestandard.com. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great day.